Most people do not lose their financial future through one giant act of stupidity. They lose it through misdirected attention. They fight over dollars and ignore tens of thousands. They comparison shop coffee and ignore a truck payment. They clip coupons while paying a financial advisor 1% of their net worth every year. They argue over a dinner bill while pretending a renovation is an investment. They feel responsible because they are trying to save money, while the real leaks in their life remain wide open and socially approved. That is how ordinary people stay ordinary for far longer than they should. I am Warren Buffett, and if there is one pattern I have seen over and over again, it is this. People often do not fail because they are reckless. They fail because they are sincere in the wrong direction. They put their discipline where it barely matters. They put their guilt on small pleasures. They put their scrutiny on symbolic frugality. And meanwhile, the real wealth killers, the big recurring, life-shaping expenses dressed up as normal choices, keep eating their future one quiet bite at a time. That is the deepest value in the reference document you gave me. On the surface, it is a list of things that are a waste of money. But underneath the list is a much stronger argument. The real danger is not luxury itself. The real danger is spending on things that feel socially normal, financially sophisticated, or emotionally justified. But that creates huge long-term drag while you tell yourself nothing is wrong. The document keeps returning to the same pattern in different forms. Big vehicle costs hidden by monthly payments, home purchases and renovations disguised as investments, ongoing advisor fees that silently consume a large portion of lifetime returns, endless aspirational purchases that do not change behavior, and small recurring costs that survive only because no one bothers to reevaluate them. That is not random. That is the architecture of financial drift. That is exactly how I want to tell this story. Not as a scolding list, as a change in eyesight, because the average person does not usually need to become more self-denying. They need to become more accurate. That is a very different thing. The world teaches people to worry about the wrong forms of spending, a nice dinner, a $100 wallet, a trip you truly value, a coat you will wear for years, a hobby you genuinely love and deliberately budget for. Fine, those things are not usually what prevent wealth. The source says this right from the beginning. It is not interested in lecturing people about generic peanut butter. It is interested in the expenses that feel totally normal, but repeated over a lifetime, can quietly consume extraordinary sums of money and destroy the compounding those sums might have produced. That framing is exactly right, because it distinguishes fake frugality from real wealth building. This is the first rule. Stop measuring seriousness by how many tiny expenses you can feel guilty about. Start measuring seriousness by whether you are confronting the few big decisions that shape everything else. That is where financial adulthood begins. The first big leak is one that almost no one wants to admit. Cars bought through monthly payment thinking. This is one of the most destructive cultural habits in America because it sounds so normal, so practical, so grown. The source says dealerships want you focused on monthly payments because that lets them stretch loan terms, add extras, and push you into far more vehicle than you should rationally buy. It also says the right question is not what monthly payment you can tolerate. The right question is the total cost of ownership, including purchase price, gas, insurance, registration, parking, maintenance, repairs, and depreciation. That is exactly right. Monthly payment thinking is not prudence. It is camouflage. It hides the size of the decision inside a smaller feeling number. It converts a giant long-term commitment into something your brain can swallow without flinching. That is why it works so well on people. You do not walk out saying, I bought a $50,000 obligation with years of phantom costs attached. You walk out saying, the payment is manageable. Manageable is one of the most dangerous words in personal finance because many things are manageable 1 month at a time while being disastrous over 10 years. The source becomes especially sharp when it turns to trucks and oversized vehicles. It gives examples of people earning modest or middle incomes, buying extremely expensive trucks they do not truly need, often to tow recreational equipment or to inhabit a self-image rather than to solve an actual work problem. It then points out the cruelest part. Many of these decisions are justified through monthly payment math instead of total cost math. That is not transportation. That is narrative spending. And narrative spending is one of the great killers of wealth. People do not just buy the truck, they buy the story. I am rugged. I am successful. I am the kind of person who needs this much machine. I am prepared. I am finally living the life I deserve, perhaps. Or perhaps you are just financing identity. That is the question adults must learn to ask. Not, can I fit this into the month? What is this going to cost my future? And what story am I telling myself to make it feel responsible? The same pattern appears in housing. People are so desperate to make homeownership sound financially pure that they stop telling the truth about what they are doing. The reference material is exceptionally strong here. It says too many people call their home an investment by default, when what they are really buying is a lifestyle choice loaded with mortgage interest, taxes, maintenance, transaction costs, and opportunity cost. It says renovations are usually even worse on this point. People label them investments, but most do not repay their cost and are better understood honestly as luxuries wrapped in financial justification. Renovate for joy, not ROI. That is the line. That is a wonderfully adult way to think. I have no objection to luxury. I object to lying. A person who says, I want a nicer kitchen because I will love it every day, is being honest. A person who says, this deck is basically an investment, when the math does not support that, is trying to purchase innocence along with the deck. That is dangerous, because the lie changes how the expense is treated. Once you call a luxury an investment, you become much more willing to finance it, stretch for it, and protect it from criticism. The truth keeps you safer. You want the basement? Fine. You want the bathroom remodel? Fine. You want the larger house with the beautiful light and the better layout? Fine. But say what it is. Say it is for joy or convenience or comfort or beauty or family life. Then the budgeting decision becomes clearer. Then the debt decision becomes clearer. Then the scale of the luxury has to answer to reality, and reality is what preserves wealth. Another uploaded file reinforces this beautifully with data on millionaire households. It says millionaire households tend to keep housing costs as a lower share of income, avoid endless upgrading, pay mortgages down earlier, and make housing a smaller share of total net worth than non-millionaire households do. That tells you something profound. Wealthy households do not become wealthy by turning housing into the center of their economic world. They become wealthy partly by refusing to let housing dominate the entire budget. That is one of the strongest lessons in finance. A home can be a blessing. It can also be a giant fixed cost machine that starves every other part of your future. That is why I prefer honest language, lifestyle. Not always investment shelter, not always wealth creation constraint. Often, and constraint is one of the key words people miss when they talk about money. Every major fixed cost is a claim on your future options. A truck payment is a claim. An oversized mortgage is a claim. An advisor fee is a claim. A recurring status cost is a claim. Enough claims, and suddenly your income does not feel like yours anymore. Which brings me to one of the most quietly destructive of all advisor fees. The source says this in the blunt way it should be said. A 1% assets under management fee may sound harmless, but over time it can consume an enormous amount of money, potentially around a quarter of long-term returns, and leave you hundreds of thousands of dollars poorer than a low-cost index fund approach might have. It also says many people do not need lifetime percentage-based management at all. If they need advice, they often need a fiduciary paid hourly, by project, or by flat fee instead. That is one of the clearest examples of why small percentages can be more dangerous. A 1% fee does not feel expensive. It feels civilized, professional, normal, adult. But 1% of a growing asset base is not a small static cost. It is a tax on compounding. It is a toll booth placed on your future. And because your future may have been very large, the toll ends up very large too. This is why I find it absurd when people agonize over a lunch order while ignoring a percentage fee that could quietly cost them 6 figures. That is not seriousness. That is misdirected seriousness. The small thing got your attention because it was visible. The big thing escaped because it sounded respectable. And that is the pattern this whole story is about: respectable leaks. The same thing happens with rewards culture, credit card points, airline status, lounge access, the heavy metal card that makes you feel like a person who knows what they are doing. I have no problem with rewards when they are treated as garnish, but the source is exactly right to ridicule people who use rewards to justify debt. It says paying 27% interest to get points worth roughly a penny is like stepping over $100 bills to pick up a fraction of a cent. That is not optimization. That is delusion. The only sane rule is simple: pay the balance in full every month, non-negotiable. If you carry debt, you are not winning the points game. The points game is winning against you. That is one of the cleanest examples of false sophistication. People want to feel clever. They want to feel like they are extracting value from the system. And meanwhile, the system is extracting value from them at a speed so high that the rewards border on comic irrelevance. A lot of people are not financially undisciplined. They are just financially theatrical. They love the feeling of doing the smart thing more than they love actually doing it. The same pattern appears in complex financial products. The source is excellent here too. It attacks overcomplicated or cult, like investments including whole life structures, infinite banking, and other products sold through mystique and complexity. Its point is not subtle. Complexity is often sold on purpose because people who feel behind are vulnerable to anything that sounds like a shortcut or secret. The simpler answer, low-cost index funds, automation, and getting on with life, sounds too plain to those who want a dramatic rescue. That is a lesson I wish more people would absorb early. Complexity often sells but because it flatters the buyer. It says, you are not ordinary. You are sophisticated enough for the special thing. And because people are hungry for identity, they buy the complexity and mistake the purchase for progress. But complexity is not a strategy. Complexity is often a smokescreen. Real progress is frequently boring, regular, unromantic. Low-cost, automated, which is why it works. Now let us talk about another class of spending people almost never see clearly because it wears the costume of personal development, aspirational purchases. This is one of the deepest points in the reference material. It talks about trendy fitness gear, endless miracle supplements, skincare cycles, courses never implemented, and home equipment bought for the person you wish you were rather than the person your current habits prove you are. It gives the simple, devastating correction: expensive tools do not create consistency. Habits do. Buying education is not the same thing as taking action. That is a very expensive form of hope. It feels noble. It feels upward. It feels like self-investment. But often it is just procrastination with better branding. A person says, this planner will make me organized. This course will make me skilled. This machine will make me fit. This skincare routine will make me transformed, perhaps. But usually the habit had to come first. Behavior first. tool second. That is a financial rule hiding inside a life rule. Once you understand it, you start spending differently. You stop buying evidence of the person you want to become and start behaving like that person before the purchase earns the right to exist. That same maturity shows up in the source's discussion of self-care and emotional spending. It says self-care is fine if you can afford it, but if it goes on the credit card and creates more stress later, then it is not really self-care. It is stress spending with nicer language. The better answer is to define what self-care actually matters to you. Build it into a conscious spending plan and enjoy it without damage. That is an excellent distinction. I do not moralize pleasure. I moralize dishonesty. If the brunch matters to you and you plan for it, wonderful. If the massage matters to you and you funded it honestly, wonderful. But if every hard week becomes an excuse for a new charge and every charge becomes I deserve it, then you are not practicing care. You are renting emotional relief at the cost of future stress. That is not a rich life. That is an expensive coping mechanism. The rich life, in the only sense that matters, is not built by cutting all joy. It is built by telling the truth about which joys matter enough to deserve money, and then refusing to let money leak into everything else. That is what the money dials idea in your source gets so right. Turn up spending where you genuinely get joy. Turn it way down or off where you do not. This is not austerity, it is design. It is the difference between spending by drift and spending by intention. That is the life I respect. Not the cheapest life, the clearest one. And this is why subscriptions matter more than people think. A forgotten subscription is not financially devastating by itself, but it is an almost perfect symbol of accidental living. The source says subscriptions kept just in case become silent drains that crowd out more meaningful spending, and it recommends periodic reviews to cut what is no longer used or loved. That is simple advice. It is also profound advice, because the larger issue is not just the charge itself. The larger issue is that you built a life where old decisions continue extracting money long after the value That is one of the defining traits of financial drift. Old choices keep living in the budget because nobody went back to interrogate them. And the same is true of status spending, cards, lounges, perks, elite memberships. The source is right again. If the perks are not being meaningfully used, then the annual fee is not buying convenience or value. It is buying a self-image. And repeated self-image purchases are some of the most expensive purchases a person can make because they often recur forever without delivering much real-life improvement. By now, the pattern should be obvious. The biggest money leaks are not usually the purchases people are most ashamed of. They are the purchases people are least honest about. The car was needed, the truck was practical, the renovation was an investment, the advisor fee was just normal. The points made the debt worth it, the self-care was necessary, the course was for growth. The subscription was just in case, the house was wealth building, the status card was good value, the complexity was sophisticated. No, most of the time what all of those phrases really mean is this: I do not want to admit what this is actually costing me. And that is why the better question in money is almost never, can I afford it? A person can temporarily afford many foolish things. The better question is this: what larger hole in my life does this expense create or preserve? Does it tighten fixed costs? Does it reduce flexibility? Does it increase dependence on future income? Does it force me to save less? Does it keep me attached to a lifestyle I do not even love? Does it quietly tax the compounding that would have changed my future? Those are real questions. And if I had to reduce this whole story to one sentence, it would be this: most people do not stay broke because they are bad at saving $10 here and there. They stay broke because they keep tolerating a few large, respectable leaks that make saving meaningful amounts almost impossible. That is the point. Stop congratulating yourself for winning tiny battles while the giant holes stay open. Fix the giant holes, then the small choices can start to matter in a way that finally compounds. That is how wealth actually begins. Not with guilt, with accuracy, not with performative frugality, with structural honesty. Not by depriving yourself of every pleasure, by refusing to let socially approved waste keep charging you for a life you do not actually want. Once a person understands that, their spending changes, not because they become stingy, because they become harder to fool. And that, more than anything, is what financial maturity really is.